Blessed good day in our Lord. Brother Paulo Sanchez here, and now in the Philippines, as we enter the month of November, particularly November 1 and November 2, we celebrate, we commemorate, we remember as families, especially what we call All Saints Day and All Souls Day, respectively. Now, in other places, other countries in the world, we have other expressions that is, for example, in other countries like in the West, we have what you call All Hallows Eve. Or, for example, in Latin American countries, in Mexico, for example, we have what you call the Day of the Dead. These are all events, opportunities for us to remember about death and the spiritual reality concerning life and death. In these days, in these particular celebrations or commemorations or remembrances, we become very much in tune, very much aware that there is a spiritual realm, that we are spiritual being, and there is a particular spiritual movement that is concerning us in our lives today in the world, but also our lives after, when our physical bodies are dead, gone, and decaying. And so it is very humbling for us to consider about death. And when we think about death, when we think about the spiritual life, how our spirits will go on after when our physical bodies are gone, we particularly fear death. Our response to the reality of death is fear, because we know all of us will die. All the saints that have gone before us, even though that they are very close with God and walked faithfully with God, and God blessed them for their service to Him, they died. All souls who once walked this earth once had a physical body, but now they're under the ground, the body is decaying, becoming dust, they're dead. All of us who are walking above, on the ground, on the surface, no matter if you live in a high palace or you live with nothing, and you're very much as close to the ground as ever before, we are all going to die. All creation in some way or another is bound to die. And our response to that reality for all of us, the probability of that, the possibility that is certain, is fear. We fear death. We fear the spiritual life after the physical body is gone in the material world. Two things I say about this fear. We fear the unknown. We are not certain what exactly will happen when our physical bodies die and when they are gone. What happens? We do not have stories, though there are some claims left and right, of people who have had some particular foresight or experience to what you call life after death, or through a near-death experience. But it's not something of the norm. And for common people like us, we have no idea, let alone certainty of what will happen to our spirits, to our souls, once our bodies are gone. And so we fear the unknown. But that's also related to the second thing I will say about our fear of death. We fear the consequences. We fear that perhaps we will not be in a good position in the next life. Perhaps we fear that there will be dire consequences. In some religions, perhaps judgments, punishments, awaiting those who did not do good in this life when they proceed to the next life. And for some of us, and in some philosophies, it is taught, and even in some worldviews and religions, it is taught that you will become void, non-existent after your physical body is gone. And that's a very fear-inspiring thought, that either you will be judged for your failures and mistakes in this life, or being such a failure, or that you will cease to exist. And so you wonder, what is all life about in this world if I will just cease to exist? We don't like that. We fear these things about death. I remember Larry King, a famous TV personality who interviewed bravely and very well many known personalities in his time. He was on the other side of the interview that time, and he was interviewed and he was asked the question, what do you fear? He is basically a fearless man, a fearless journalist, a fearless interviewer. What could he fear? And he said, death. You and I all fear death. Now, what is our response to the fear of death? As human beings, even set aside your religious beliefs, even set aside your religious, spiritual expectations about the life after next. What is our response to our fear of death? We want to overcome death, right? We want to defeat death. It's the human response to the idea of dying. We want to overcome it. We want to once and for all, perhaps in the future, defeat it. in two senses. We want to defeat death in the literal sense. You ever wonder why people are trying to prolong their lives? The idea of delaying death is just like the idea of overcoming and defeating death. How do they try to delay death and prolong their lives? Perhaps by eating well. Perhaps by exercising, beating their bodies through discipline so that their bodies, their muscles, their organs will be stronger, more resilient, especially in the times we're living in where there are global pandemics. Perhaps they do so by accruing or accumulating wealth so that they will be more comfortable, less stressed. Here's another way in which we are trying to literally defeat death. I consider this rather ironic that in fast foods, there's now the emergence of plant-based items. Have you gone to a fast food and you notice that their burger patties, for example, are now made from plant substances? It's rather ironic, right? Fast food, you think about fast food, you think about unhealthy food, oily food, fatty food, a fast way to get sick, God forbid die, if you keep eating that way. But now they're serving you plant-based food because now they know that the trend is such that people, more and more people, are trying to eat healthy, stay healthy, and again, delay death, overcome death. There's so much money spent on pharmaceuticals, in various medicines, vaccines, treatments, therapies, strategies to be well. That's another example that tells you about humanity's attempt to delay and in that way overcome and defeat death. The second way in which we try to defeat death is in a very figurative sense. I call it, we're trying to bring the light and beat the shadow of death. You see, even for many among us who live in the world right now, they are living under the shadow of death. What do I mean? Their physical bodies are okay. They may be even be more stronger, more resilient physically than you, mentally than you. But they're living under difficult situations, under situations of hardship, suffering, injustice, oppression, and so they're like living dead beings. While they are alive, they're being beaten down, they're being killed, they're being harmed. And so they're already dying or even being dead inside, even if they're physically well. For example, millions in the world, billions in the world still live under the poverty line, and so they live under the shadow of death. Because of the scarcity of resources, not only do they not enjoy life in the world, life becomes hard for them. They're not able to enjoy life in this world. They suffer, and many among them die easy, die young. There is, of course, terminal illness still in the world of medical advancements and technologies. We still have cancer. We still have various heart ailments. We still have terminal conditions. And these people, knowing that they will expire soon, but they are living under certain depression, sadness, gloom about their impending doom, they're now living in the shadow of death, and our prayers go out to you for your healing and for comfort in these times. There are people suffering right now because of injustice in forms of violence and war. I just remembered some days ago of 2 shootings in the United States of innocent people. People just celebrating these days, the season we're in right now, gunned down innocently. And so many people live under the threat of gun violence, of criminality and hatred on the basis of race. Let's go to the other side of the world, to the West Asian side, to what you call the Middle East. In Palestine right now, there is a shadow of death covering the land and the peoples there. Innocent people being forced to evacuate, being forced to move, being forced to go into cramped hospitals and die there. And die under the collapsing buildings and die under the weight of bombs and rockets. Innocent people in Palestine, all over the world, living under the shadow of death. And so, we're trying to defeat that kind of death through our attempts at improving the conditions of human life, through medicine, through science, through human technology, but also through forms and mechanisms of peace, of diplomacy, of setting a global harmonious order, by trying to attain food security, by trying to attain medical security, medical welfare for more. We're trying to beat back death, and that's the human response. But be rest assured that humanity is not alone in this struggle, in this fight to defeat death. Do you know, and since we're talking about our spiritual being and our spiritual connection to our Maker, who is also in spirit, our Creator God, having mentioned that, having now being made aware about that, do you know that God is also opposed to death itself? God considers death his enemy, and he takes it personally. For example, you read in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 25 through 26, concerning the resurrection and the order of resurrection, of defeating death. Look at what Paul says here. For he must reign. This is referring to Jesus Christ, the Son of God, until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be abolished, that will be defeated, that will be overcome, is death. And that's our promise and assurance these days. And as we remember days like this, God is opposed to, God considers death the enemy. And God desires and will overcome and once and for all defeat death. Defeat death. Why is God opposed to death? Why does God consider death an enemy? So much so that he will oppose it, he will struggle with it, he will fight it, he will defeat it for us. Well, let's go to the literal sense again. God is not delighted when his creation dies. Let me be very clear. God does not delight in us dying. Even if we believe, subscribe to the idea of life after death, and we will proceed to be with God, the idea of us having to go through death physically and in all other forms makes God weep. It breaks his heart. To see animals, to see plants, to see creation suffer and die, it also makes God sad, because God made creation to be good. And above all creation, God made us in his image. The thought of us dying, the reality of us dying saddens God. It saddens God. But in particular, God is saddened by the fact that many among us will die apart from him. You see, in this life and in the next, God desires for us to be with him, to have fellowship with him, to enjoy his goodness in this world, yes, even in this hard world, this broken world, and especially as he perfects the world in the next. God desires to be with us, and to think that we will die apart from him and so suffer the life after next apart from him and his goodness, it really breaks God. And so God is determined to overcome and defeat death. Second, the figurative shadow of death. I had said a while ago, God made creation to be good. What did sin, what did humanity do to creation? It made it bad. Through abuse, through excess, through harm, through violence, through sins, immorality, this world is broken. This world is under the shadow of death. And many people, innocent people, regardless of your race, religion, or what you're going through right now, many are suffering under this shadow of death. And again, it breaks the heart of God to see us this way, to see creation this way, to see you this way. You might be alive and well, very healthy, but there is a shadow on your head right now, in your heart right now, that keeps you from enjoying God and the goodness of God in your life today. I don't know if it's an illness, if it's poverty, if it's oppression, if it's injustice, if it's violence, if somebody's doing something to you that is not of God. God is breaking for you right now. His heart is breaking for you. And so God is again determined to overcome and defeat death. Not for his sake. He is eternal. He is Alpha and Omega from beginning to end. He does not pass away. But we do. And for the sake of his creation, and for the pinnacle of his creation, humanity, God is determined to defeat death. And in that, God has responded. And this is our assurance. He sent his Son, Jesus Christ himself, to give of himself, so that in the literal sense, through Jesus Christ, faith in Jesus Christ and a life in him, we will now live with God. And that is to be alive, to enjoy the goodness of God, particularly the presence of God, the provision of God, the purposes of God. That is through Jesus Christ. And second, the figurative shadow of death. Jesus, the resurrected Jesus Christ, defeats the shadow of death because he inspires us. He empowers us through the Spirit of God, those who believe and follow Jesus, to now declare life unto the world and struggle and succeed against all forms of deaths while we are living in this world. Yes, If we follow Jesus, we will declare His life. We will declare life-giving power through the gospel received, but we will also work against all forms of death in this world. Poverty, oppression, illness, injustice, name it. Anything that breaks creation, anything that makes God weep for us, we will overcome through Jesus Christ by the power of His Spirit. And so now as we conclude, as we go through All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, let us remember also ourselves. This is of saints, souls, and selves. So when you think about the saints, think of them as an inspiration. That those who have gone before you overcame the difficulty of life here in this world. And they honored God and followed Jesus and did good in the world. And so they pass on to the next with such a legacy for us, but also they received the reward from God. They are an inspiration to us. Now when you think about the souls who are no longer with us, so to speak, let's talk about what we can learn from them. Even those we do not admire, what can we learn from them while we are still in the land of the living? May the lessons lead us to the saving knowledge of God through Christ. May the knowledge of them lead us to live, start living. It's never too late, as long as you're alive, to start living in freedom from bondages, from the shadows of death in our lives. Let's learn from them. See, sometimes, and I mean this to still encourage discernment, spiritual discernment and conviction among us, but sometimes we over-spiritualize days like Day of the Dead in the way that we try to distance ourselves from family members and friends who do not share our particular expressions of faith and culture. I remember someone asking me about tricking or treating. Should I, as a follower of Christ, should I and my family participate in the tricking or treating, the trick or treat the practice? Now, of course, we caution. Remember why you celebrate a certain thing. What about it do you celebrate? Of course. And of course, in conviction, we speak about elements of Halloween, trick-or-treating, that leads us to sin or causes us particular bondages to death and the fear of death. But sometimes when we over-spiritualize these things, we're no longer able to fellowship with the people who are alive. People in our families who don't share our faith, and we're not able to engage them, to encourage them, and to learn about the dearly departed in our lives. And so if you see your loved ones weeping for the dead, even if you do not share their particular faith and culture, weep with them, cry with them, reminisce the good times with them, and also learn the lessons from your departed loved ones with them. Don't alienate them. Don't think you're holier than thou. Because that creates a new kind of darkness, a kind of death in your relationships, right? If they're overly spiritualizing, overly legalistic thinking, and I'm not preaching about not being cautious and convicted here. I'm just simply saying that we are trying to, in an attempt to be right about certain things, we deny the more important things in our families and loved ones, and that is fellowship, that is community, that is love, and quality time together these days, these holidays. And thirdly, for ourselves, let us take part of the struggle. Let us take part of the struggle with God, that we are called in Christ Jesus to overcome and defeat death. So to everyone who will receive the life-giving message and power of the gospel, declare it, share it in words, but also in works. And also be involved. Be involved in the struggle. I don't know what shadow of death you're looking at right now. You see someone who's sick, encourage that person. Help that person through treatment, through therapy. You see someone who is poor and hungry but trying to struggle and trying to build up themselves, trying to pull themselves out of poverty. Why don't you do something more? Go the extra mile aside from momentary charity. Why don't you give them a career, give them a head start with studying? If you see someone suffering across the world, on the other part of the world, because of war and violence, pray. Pray that the shadow of death does not snatch them, that these children, the young people, will have a full life, a life with God. And if you can do something about it, do something about it. Talk to your leaders. Hold leaders accountable. Vote for the right leaders. Support the right leaders who have God principles in their mind and in their heart, so that these things will not repeat themselves, and the shadow of death, the darkness of death, will be pushed away by Jesus Christ, the light of the world. God bless your times together these days. God bless your All Saints' Day. God bless your All Souls' Day. And of course, remember where your self is. I pray we all find ourselves with God now and forevermore. God bless you. We love you.